Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel. I'll be joined with Rabbi David Aaron after the break. Every single one of us has a past. We live in the present, and we have this unknown future that minute by minute is starting to unfold before our eyes. So much of life does actually happen to us, but there's also a lot of life that we choose. We choose so many parts of what is in our life, and we also choose how we're going to respond to even the parts of life that we didn't choose that happened to us. And as much as I think there's a part of us that intellectually recognize, right, there's certain parts of my life that I didn't choose. It happened. There was no choice in the matter. There is a lot of life that I can choose. And even for what I couldn't choose, I can choose how I'm going to think about it. I can choose how I'm going to respond to it. I can, to some degree, choose of how I'm going to let this affect my now. Meaning what's done is done. We know this. The past, you don't go back and you can't rewrite it. But what I do have an effect on is what's happening right now. And what's happening right now is really also going to have an effect on what will be in my life. And I do have a lot more control over what's happening now and what will be based on how I respond to what's happening now than I do on what was. And as much as I think, again, this is sort of clear to so many of us intellectually, emotionally, this is often really hard to integrate. Even if in my head I might know, yes, something happened in the past. It was very painful, very difficult for me. And it's still, all these years later, eating me up inside. It's stopping me from enjoying the blessings that I do have right now. Why am I letting this happen? Why am I doing this to myself? No one else is suffering from this except for me. Or maybe my children or my husband, or there are people around me that are suffering from this because I'm in a mood all the time, or I'm always depressed, or I'm always can't just stop talking about how bad I feel about what happened or what was. So, but if in my head, I might be able to say, I recognize this isn't working. I want to think differently. I want to feel differently. I just don't know how to get there. So this is the question that I do want to address with the rabbi after the break, is when we have a past that is affecting us in a negative way in our present moment, that's stopping us from living the life that we want to live, from living in the now, and really embracing every person's life has beauty and has challenge. And I'm not trying to deny that the challenge is there, but sometimes the challenges overshadow and prevent me from being able to enjoy the parts of my life that are beautiful, that could be enjoyable. So how do I not allow the parts of my past that can overshadow my present? How can I stop that from happening? How can I really embrace my present moment, the positive and the good that is in my life right now? What are the techniques that I can use to really live a life of joy and really make choices now that will help give me a better chance of having a more positive and more enjoyable future? When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
And welcome to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron. Rabbi Aaron, there's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and imagine I'm not the only one who has this challenge of sometimes we get stuck. And I'm sure, I hope with this conversation, you will enlighten me and many others. Sometimes I find I need these perspective changes, these little tweakings of how I think about life. So I've been thinking about the fact that really, and we've discussed this before, life is happening right now. Whatever is happening now is where my life is. And yet, so often, my now is so clouded by things that happened in the past. And sometimes it's interesting. It's not only bad things. I mean, sometimes good things. The things used to be well. Things used to be good. Like, it could be in so many areas. It could be maybe I had a certain aspect of my health that I used to have, and maybe now I'm struggling with. And instead of, I get stuck by thinking about how things used to be and that I don't have it now. It could be an aspect of family life or finances. I mean, I feel like everyone at some point in life has a time that they come to a point where things used to be one way and now they're not. And we find it can be a struggle to embrace now for what it is when I keep thinking about how things used to be. And it could be something different where maybe there was something traumatic or problematic in my past, some pain that could have even happened so many years ago. And even though that pain the situation isn't continuing today. The pain that I bring into my present moments clouds me and makes it challenging for me to really live now. So how do we deal with this challenge of wanting to try to live our lives now when sometimes aspects of the past make that difficult? We keep bringing it forward with us.
Right. Yeah, well, I think it's about going to the core of what's the point of being alive in the first place. Judaism says that the ultimate pleasure in life is to feel connected to God. And we feel connected to God when we're in service of God, and in service of God means to be bringing good into the world. That's what it means to serve God. That's what it means to be connected to God, is I'm serving to bring good into the world. And there's a lot of different ingredients to good, and that's called the 10 Sefirot in Kabbalah, the 10 attributes, which is goodwill and wisdom and understanding and kindness and compassion and love and truth and integrity and peace. And those are, just to name a few of what we could call the ingredients of a totally good life. And that happens now. I once thought about it. I have these crazy, I have a crazy imagination. I thought, if I were a light bulb, when would I be happy? I would not be happy thinking about how much light I gave in the past. And I wouldn't be happy about how much light I'm going to give. I'd be happy when I am doing my thing right now, which is illuminating the room. And that's, I think, what would make a light bulb happy, is just doing his thing right now. And a person could have an amazing past, and they're not feeling happy right now. And people say, "What are you talking about? You have such an incredible life." Well, because it's not about remembering what was; it's about living what is. And so I think if we could go back to and remind ourselves, which is, I think, the biggest challenge in life, is to remind ourselves over and over again, what's the point of all this? And the point of all this is to be in service of good and always looking for an opportunity, whatever way we can, to serve, to bring more good into the world.
So I'm thinking, I guess one of the perspective is so important, because it really, I'd be honest with myself, if that was always on my mind of what good can I be doing right now, I think we'd be in such a good place, and we'd really be living our purpose, especially, right, if this was constantly on my mind and that was the perspective I was living with. So this is already, I feel like, starting at the very foundation, which is so important. And yet there's so many things that sometimes come to cloud that, meaning, especially if I had something, we're so used to routines. They're so used to what was, what is. We get into certain routines. And when we're shaken up in that routine, especially, let's say, if we're talking about things, a certain aspect of my life I used to have. Let's say I used to have my health. I used to have finances. I could give a lot of charity. I could host a lot of guests, or even with COVID, separate from having the finances, and my purpose felt like it was having company, having Shabbat guests, inviting people into my home. And then all of a sudden, when that changes, it really sort of sets me for a loop, and I have to then really reevaluate that question of what is my purpose right now.
Well, then, you see, that becomes, and I'm not saying this is easy for me either, but that becomes an opportunity to practice freedom. Because freedom means that I am not stuck in a pattern. And so what I used to do is not what I'm able to do now. And so that's going to shake me up and say, okay, but what I used to do was an act of kindness, was an act of bringing more good into the world in the way that I did it. I can't do it that way. So let me think of ways that I can do it now. Like one thing, and I encourage my students this, it's just so simple that if we would just every night think of one person that we could send, even just an SMS to, thinking about you. I hope you're well. How's it going? Just wanted to send you my blessings. Wow, that would really warm someone's heart to hear from somebody that I thought of you, I cared about you, and I'd like to know how you're doing. Wow, that's that's unbelievable. And it's so simple, and everybody benefits from it, because there's no better life than helping others have a better life. And so if I can do good, it's like, so many people, their life has been revolving around having a good time. But in Judaism, it's about not having a good time, it's doing good. And what could that good be? And so there was a good, before Corona that a person might have had a pattern of doing, and that was great. But that's just not what's happening now. And so we have to be free enough to release ourselves from what was and embrace what is.
I think what I like so much about what you're sharing here is that it's not only, sometimes I often think, being in the right perspective, which I think is very key, but it's not just about how you think about it. It's about you're saying you have to act on it. Meaning it's not just about trying to think about what good and my purpose and how do I, thinking about how I have to maybe revise some of my thinking, but it's about putting it into action, doing something with it.
Right. I mean, I feel the happiest when I'm immersed in what I'm doing now. And thinking about what could be or what was, can bring happiness. But to me, real happiness is when you're immersed in what you're doing now, especially if what you're doing now is meaningful and you feel that you're really doing in service. And so, in the East, there's something called be here now. I would say Judaism would say serve here now, like find an opportunity to be in service now. And I think when we're in the moment, I also think happiness is something that, I think if a person has to ask themselves, am I happy right now? Is this happiness? Is this happiness? They're not going to be happy, because I think happiness is a state of mind that we're not aware of until afterwards. So, you know what? I was really immersed in what I was doing and I was really feeling happy. But if I'm immersed in what I'm doing and asking myself a question, am I happy now? Then I'm not immersed in what I'm doing.
This is a real challenge, being immersed in what we're doing, because as much as what you're saying, it really resonates between the way we distract ourselves. That we're often so doing one thing, but thinking about, forgetting about thinking of something else. We're on our phone, but we're supposed to be watching a class. You're not really in what you do. I'm talking to somebody, but at the same time, I'm waiting for this next message to come through. I'm not actually immersed in what I'm doing. I'm reading my kids a book, but I keep checking my phone or the phone's ringing. I'm getting up, sitting down.
This is the plague of this generation, this multitasking, this lack of ability to stay focused. There's a verse that says, B'chol derchecha dehu. In all your ways, know God. And Rav Kook explains that means in every step of your way, you can know God. And that means the step that you take now. Are you fully in what you're doing, or you're doing, but you're not there? I remember I was at someone's home, and over top of their sink, they had a bumper sticker that said, I'd rather be learning Torah. Now, that is a foolish bumper sticker, because if right now you're doing the dishes and you need to be doing the dishes, then having a bumper sticker telling you that I'd rather be doing something other than what I'm doing right now is really destructive. If this is what I need to be doing, and if this is what I'm doing, then this is where I'll find God.
But so much of this is really working on our mental state to train our minds to stay focused. Because even just the mind wandering, how often am I, again, having a potentially wonderful experience bonding with someone who I love, but if I'm thinking about all the things that are stressing me out, I'm not in that moment. I'm in a stressful moment instead of the moment of spending time, let's say, with my children. But it really takes mind training to have that awareness that I'm doing it, and then to bring my mind back to the moment that I'm in.
Right, yeah. And it does go back to action. It's about putting it into action, because that's who we are. We are here to do, and I think we kind of overthink. Not that thinking's bad, but thinking should lead to action.
So then, even with that action, meaning this awareness, I think, is the first step, is so important, of recognizing that immersing myself in what I'm doing now really is important in terms of really feeling like I'm living my life and finding that joy. But so it has to be conscious, and then I have to even tell myself, okay, for example, right now I'm going to read a story to my son. This is what I'm doing, and this is what I want to focus on for the next 10 minutes. And even tell myself I don't want to get distracted. And if I don't do that, then it's actually much more likely that I will get distracted because I haven't prepared myself not to, and I won't find that time as satisfying.
Right. I have to be able to say to myself, there's nothing more important than reading my son this book right now.
And this is something, again, it's a concept, a perspective, but then putting it into action by telling ourselves, and then we have ample opportunities to really work on it by immersing ourselves in the now. When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Hi everyone, this is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Welcome back to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel talking with Rabbi David Aaron. How can we increase our quality of life by living now? Every moment is its opportunity, and oftentimes our moments are so marred by thinking about the past, worries about the past, thinking about how the past might have been better, certain painful things that creep into my today. And that aspect is what I want to now ask you about, is when a person's gone through, let's say, a certain painful event, a traumatic event, or experience in life. So often the event doesn't end when it ends. It can continue on in a person's life for so many years. How can one try to, when we're talking about here, trying to live in the moment, live in the joy of what's happening now, immersing ourselves. When a person finds that negative past experiences are creeping up on them, what can one do to try to, you don't want to deny it and squelch it because there's obviously pain that's there. On the other hand, you don't want it to take over moment by moment of the joys that can be happening now.
Yeah. Well, the famous teaching, don't think of a pink elephant. As soon as we try not to think about something, that's exactly what we think about. And so trying to resist some thought is what causes it to persist. And the way to deal with it is there's a teaching, sur me'ra v'aseh tov, remove yourself from bad and do good. So the way that's explained by the Hasidic movement is the way you remove yourself from bad is by doing good. In other words, to say I don't want to think about that thought is exactly what's going to get you to think about that thought. So you need to get yourself involved with thinking about some other thought, and or just embrace the thought, which is, yes, this thought is coming, and just look at it and just acknowledge that. Yes, it happened, and grieve. That is an incredibly powerful and one of the real ways to deal with sad memories is to be sad over them. We've talked about this before. I believe that depression is not because I'm not able to be happy. I think often depression is because I don't know how to be sad. There's something that really, in a very valid way, makes me sad, and I've been running away from it rather than grieving about it. I've been trying to avoid it when it just stays there waiting for me, and there'll be plenty of moments. And so why avoid it when there's real pain there? Look at it, acknowledge that pain, and cry, and grieve about it, and talk about it with somebody close, whereby, there is an idea in Torah that talking about something too much is not a good idea either, because then you can reinforce it. But on the other hand, not to talk about it at all. And so there has to be a healthy balance, but to really talk about the pain with somebody that you feel is genuinely compassionate, and you're only looking for someone to listen. You're not going for advice. You don't want them to tell you what to do with it. You just really want to share your pain and hear somebody say, "Oi, oi, oi." I'm with you. I hear it. It's really very painful.
There's a theme that I'm hearing in everything you're sharing, even from the first segment, and it's that we have to really have a consciousness of thought. Because I think so often what happens is these thoughts come into our head, and it's almost like they start controlling us, and we're not even, whether we're aware of it, but we're not really aware of it, and then it's all of a sudden, it's like, why am I in a bad mood, or I'm so distracted, and before I know it, it's like I just get swept up into certain thoughts. And what you're really sharing here is the importance of consciously making, choosing thoughts. Or when a thought comes in, I'm consciously going to focus on this because I need to feel sad right now, as opposed to just feeling like the sadness is overtaking me and all these sad thoughts are just rushing in and I have no control over them. Whether it be, again, as you're saying, that I choose to now feel sad and I need to give this space for some of the sadness, or I'm going to choose, yes, this thought just popped into my head that's making me sad, but right now I want to choose to think about something else that's going to make me feel better. But the key element is that it's a consciousness of choice within the thoughts I'm going to have, as opposed to just thoughts coming through and just taking over me.
Right. Although I can only share from my personal experience, I have a hard time choosing that I'm going to think about something else. What I have a better time of doing is I'm going to choose to do something else and get active, because it's hard there's a thought that's haunting you. You say, you know what, I'm not going to think about that. And sometimes, you could create a list of positive experiences in your life. And whenever you get this negative thought, you can go to your list and pick, your birthday party, the surprise birthday party your family did for you last year. And you could just sit there and imagine it and really get back into it. But it's kind of hard. It's hard to do that. I think to get your mind off something, you have to get your hands into something. And you have to do something that takes your mind off it. It's like, it's a crazy thing, but sometimes when I have to go into the vegetable and fruit market, Machane Yehuda, to go buy, I have a list. That's the weirdest thing. I actually feel happier just because I have this list and I know exactly what I need to buy. And then I did that. And it's the weirdest thing. It actually is, I find it therapeutic that sometimes to get your mind off something, you've just got this task to do. And you did that, and then you did another task, and you just get your mind off it, and you get your hands into something else, which draws your mind to where your actions are.
But even that, it sounds like if we can have more awareness of when these thoughts, sometimes thoughts are, 10 minutes we're already thinking about something that's making us feel sad or upset. And am I aware of it? Well, on some level I'm aware of it, but I'm not really aware of it. And then 10 minutes later, I'm like, oh my goodness, how long have I been sitting here thinking about this sad thought? But the more aware we can be when these thoughts come up, and the more we can already have a plan of action, as you're saying, like, okay, this is what I need to do when I start thinking this way, or starting to have a certain feeling that's unpleasant. But thinking about it almost, if we can, ahead of time. And for each person, it's going to be individual, as you're sharing too. I mean, we have to sort of become more aware within ourselves of what are the things that I can do, or the space I can give this that will actually help me through this.
Right. But I would like to add to that, though. And I'm sharing from my own experience. Sometimes it's not the thought that is upsetting you. It's really your state of mind that's looking for negative thoughts. And you have to break that state of mind, because you could say, look, I'm having these negative thoughts. I'm going to work hard to think positive thoughts. But really, that's like trying to paint on rusted metal. Like, it doesn't grab the paint. And I find that sometimes the problem is not what you're thinking about. You already got into a negative state of mind. And you have to break that negative state, because otherwise you're trying to paint on a canvas that's not holding the paint. And so the question is, are negative thoughts creating negative states of mind? Or is a negative state of mind looking for validation by finding negative thoughts to think about? That's probably the negative thoughts cause the state of mind, but now you're in this bad state of mind, and you have to break that state of mind. And, one way that a person could break that state of mind is go for a run with some really great music, or just make a phone call to somebody else and just do some act of kindness. I believe in what I call kindness therapy, which is, I just mentioned the fruit market, Machane Yehuda, big fruit market in Israel, in Jerusalem. And just like there's a bunch of old people there that are, they're carrying their bags and it's very heavy. Just go help somebody and see that smile on their face. And that will break a person's state of mind. Just do something. But when a person tries to change their mind, I think it's very hard to change your mind. I think you have to change your actions, change your environment. But I think sometimes you're just in a bad state of mind, and it's collecting and it's attracting bad thoughts that are reinforcing that state of mind. And you have to figure out a way to break that state of mind.
So really the way to break that, though, is to engage in some sort of concrete action, as opposed to just trying to tell yourself, I don't want to be thinking this way, I shouldn't be thinking this way, I'd like to be thinking different. If that's still all happening in the mind, as opposed to an action which involves your body physically doing something, it's something a bit outside of the mind. And that can, but I'd imagine that the mindset of still saying I need to get out and take a run right now to break this negative thinking cycle is still important, to recognize that I'm trying to take this action with the goal of resetting. Sometimes we have to rebooting my system here.
Yes, exactly.
And everybody, and I feel like, there's no one who's lived a life without some sort of challenge. Obviously, some people have a lot more than others. Trauma, some sort of dream that wasn't realized, or disappointments in life. And so we really all have to recognize, again, have this awareness that you're sharing here, and really know how to, as I'm saying, press that reboot. Sometimes know when do we need to restart, because we can feel like we're trying all sorts of things. I'm trying to change the way I think. That's why what you're sharing is so important, and I'm just not having luck. I may even want to say I'd like to feel happier, and it's just not working. So what you're sharing here is so important, that sometimes the reboot, it's not going to be I'm in a negative thinking mode, so I need to change the way I'm thinking. It has to come a little bit more from an outside approach of I need to do something now that's going to help me reboot my system.
Right. I think just even making a phone call to somebody and talk to somebody. Because very often when we get into this negative space, we begin to isolate ourselves. And so it's like I have a principle, which is when it comes to good, always do what you don't feel like doing. If you have a thought of a good deed, but you don't feel like doing it, just do it anyways.
Because again, if my goal is that I'd like to really feel better, then I need to recognize, and what you're sharing here is so important. It's sometimes we have to go against ourselves to actually be true to ourselves. No one consciously chooses, I just want to feel miserable. Most people would say, I'd actually like to feel better, I just don't know how. And sometimes the way to do it, as you're sharing, is that I have to consciously, even if I don't feel like doing something, but by doing a good deed, doing something good for another person specifically, reaching out to somebody else, that's going to come back at me and bring good to me as well. When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Soul Talk. Leora Mandel talking with Rabbi David Aaron but such valuable insights into understanding how we can really embrace now and find the good in now, in spite of the fact that there's so many aspects of life and from our past that are not what we would have wanted, or that life right now may not feel like it's ideal. But how do I focus on where my life is good now and totally embrace, be in the moment, which again, I think nowadays especially isn't easy for us. Another aspect of this that I wanted to ask you about is, it sort of ties in with what we were talking about the last before the break, is the power of perspective. Because you're talking about, again, that there's times where we have negative thinking and we're not going to necessarily be able to get out of it because our whole mindset and approach right now is in a funk, and we're talking about the importance of we have to do something to break it. But there also is this aspect of, the way I think about what happened in my past has such, the general perspective even, has such a huge effect on how I live my present. And I'll give you an example, because just recently I was having a conversation with someone who unfortunately was in a terrorist attack here in Israel a few years ago, and it was the anniversary recently of the attack, even though it happened a number of years ago. And she was with a friend who went through the same attack, and she actually was hurt more, had more of a long-term injury than her friend. And she was saying that she recently got together with the group of people who were involved in this attack, and her friend just keeps saying, this was the worst day of my life, it was a terrible day. And she just is so stuck on how bad it was. And the friend I was talking to, again, her injury, she still has an injury that she's struggling with. She was like, it was a bad day. I don't disagree with you, but it was also like, I feel like I call it my new birthday. I celebrate this as a birthday, a second birthday, because I realized I could have been killed and I wasn't. And yes, I have this injury, and I'm not saying I don't struggle with it. It's not painful, but I recognize that I was given the gift of a second chance at life. And what was so interesting is hearing her talk and hearing how she was frustrated, like, why can't her friend also be in this perspective? And we're talking, we can't change how someone else feels, in this given moment. But it really brought to light the fact that they both went through this traumatic event, but the perspective that each is now trying to live forward with is making a huge difference in how the quality of life today.
Right. Well, one of the core choices we have in life is, what is the story we're going to tell ourselves about our life? And it's really the story you tell yourself. Clearly, these two people are telling themselves, very different stories about the same event. And I think we don't realize that we've made a choice on what that story is, and that there's a different way to tell the story. I gave a talk at someone's home, and someone sponsored the talk, and in honor of their son's birthday. And I said, how old is your son? They said, well, he would have been 24 right now, but he was killed in the army and on the battlefield. And I thought to myself, wow, like, he would have been. No, he wouldn't have been, because the plan was that he was going to leave this world at 18. And so to continue to live with the sense of he could have been alive, but he isn't, that's a story that they're telling themselves, when, if that's when he left the world, that was the plan God had for it. He came here for this amount of time and he's gone. And why keep living with he would have been, when how are you so sure he would have been? There's another way of looking at it. And so they just kind of live with his death. And when you think about it, my guess is if they would have a chance to talk to him, he would say, Mommy, Daddy, don't keep mourning me. I want you to be happy. I want you to go on with your life. And I think they feel maybe guilty whenever they feel happy, because how could I be happy if my son was killed at 18 on the battlefield? When, if their son could come back, I'm sure he would say, I don't want you to be unhappy for me. I'm okay. I'm more worried about you. You live your life, and I won't feel it's an insult that you're able to laugh again. In fact, it would give me great encouragement to know that you could laugh again.
But again, being able to laugh versus being continual mourning is all about probably even perspective, as you're sharing. I think how we think about the situation. If I think about, God forbid to ever be in such a situation, but to think about the gift of the life that was, I'm going to be celebrating that life, as opposed to thinking about all the years that won't be. I'm going to be mourning that the whole time. So every aspect, even of tremendous pain and tragedy, the perspective we take on it has such an effect on how we continue to live with it for the rest of our life.
Right. I mean, one of the most important skills in life is the art of interpretation. Because so much of what's going on is interpretation. Sometimes when I come home at night and some challenging, disturbing event happened to me that day, and I share it with my wife, and then she gives me this incredibly different interpretation, which shows the event in a positive light, an empowering light, and I had this negative interpretation. And suddenly I realized that I'm confusing the event with my interpretation of the event, and there's another way to see what actually happened. And that is really the skill, one of the most important skills that we need to develop. It's actually the skill that one develops in learning Torah, because so much of learning Torah is interpreting the words of the Torah. And there's many, many ways to interpret the Torah, but some interpretations have really nothing to do with what's written there, and that's not valid. But there's many valid interpretations that can go in different directions that really is a valid interpretation of that verse in the Torah, in the Bible. And we need to practice and develop that skill of interpreting with an eye towards the good, with an eye towards seeing the event and asking ourselves, how can I interpret this event as an opportunity for growth and empowerment and becoming the better me?
This is very powerful. And I feel like we pick a story, whether it's consciously or not, or we have the way we see a situation, and then oftentimes it can be for years we'll tell ourselves the same version of the story, not realizing there's another way we can look at it. And I think like a prime example is I often hear this with siblings when they talk about what it was like growing up in their parents' house. Let's say especially if there were problems and it wasn't the ideal childhood. You can have two siblings that had the same unideal parents, and for one, the story is always all the pain of their life is from the way they were brought up, and another, the story is mom and dad had their own problems and they had their issues, but maybe it taught me how to be resilient. It taught me I had to become more independent because of that. I had to learn, I found other people that I could look up to, and that's how I got through. Meaning you could have two people even with the same situation with such a different story, and the story that is told affects the rest of how one lives one's life.
Exactly. And that's really, I think people, the more we're aware of that, we are interpreting events, and the more we can kind of distinguish between what actually happened. For instance, a person sets up to meet somebody at 8 o'clock at a restaurant and they don't show up. So now my mind starts to interpret why they didn't show up. So I could say, they are so disrespectful of my time, and get really angry. Or I could say, oh my gosh, something might have happened to them, and I get worried. Or I could say, you know what? I'm just going to wait. I'm sure they'll be here soon. And when they get here, I'll ask them what happened. But those are three completely different interpretations. One gets me angry, one gets me worried, and one calms me down. But I had to choose to decide what I wanted to interpret about the event that they're not here at 8 o'clock. And that's all that happened. They're not here at 8 o'clock. The rest was interpretation.
And so often I think we get stuck in saying that the story is what happened, as opposed to recognizing, as you're saying, the difference between the event, the facts on the ground versus our story, the interpretation, the way we interpret it, and to be able to distinguish that and saying, wait a minute, these are the facts, but this is a story I've been saying to myself about the facts, and it's not working for me, this story. It's making me feel angry all the time. How can I maybe change this story, my interpretation of it? Because it's possible that change can also be true. And I guess even if it's not fully true, at the end of the day, let's say if someone wronged me, that happened in the past, it's done, but it's continuing to eat me up because the story I'm telling myself about it is just harming me. It's not really even harming anybody else.
Right. Well, so that's, part of the challenge of how to be sure not to carry over past stories, which is, something happened repeatedly in my home, my father, my mother, and then I tell myself a story about how people are, and then I apply that story to my husband or wife. who are not that way. But I've already decided that is the story, rather than that was an event and that was what happened then, but that doesn't mean that's what's happening now.
And everything we're talking about here, these are such powerful tools for what the goal is to live with joy now. Life is happening now. The past is the past. And again, the theme that I keep realizing with everything is we really have to become more conscious of how some of the past is affecting us today. If I'm not able to live in the moment, if I'm not able to take what could be even, again, I go back to the sweet picture of me sitting with my son and reading him a story, having a meal with my family. Maybe I'm working and immersed in what I'm doing. If there's things that are always interfering with that from my past and thoughts that are interfering, then I really have to become more conscious of where is all this coming from, so that I can try to, rework it and, as we're saying, sometimes reboot by starting to do something differently to break that chain of thoughts. Sometimes I have to recognize there's a story I've been constantly telling myself, and I need to change that story. But having awareness that this is happening is key.
Yeah, and it goes back to making choices. And one choice we discussed today is choosing what you're going to do. And the other one is choosing what you're going to say to yourself about what happened.
And these are such powerful, powerful tools so that we can remove ourselves from any part of the past that's keeping us stuck and really embrace the opportunity of life that's happening right now and all the opportunities that we can really have if we live in the moment. I want to thank you all for joining us. Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.